Podcast. This is episode lucky number 13, and we have a returning special guest. You know him, you love him, Crrow777 of the Crrow777 radio podcast. And if you listen to Crow at all, there are a few catchphrases that stick out, like belief is the enemy of knowing, and the topic of today's episode regarding the acceptable year of our Lord. What exactly is the acceptable year of our Lord, and how can we link Crow's incredible astronomy work to this topic? I think we're going to have a really good time. How's it going, Dylan?
Everything's going amazing on our end. I'm excited to see what you guys have to say about Reverend Taylor. And for the audience, I think Crow and Chance are probably one of the only two people that I know that I've even read some of Reverend Taylor's work. So it's a good combo to be able to talk about it. And this is this particular work that we've been going through for the last several episodes I learned about it from Crow. So this is like after Taylor published his initial books. So it's been fun.
And welcome, Crow. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. Thank you guys so much for having me. And it just occurred to me, if you'll slap a link in the chat, I can post that out on my places.
Absolutely. And you're welcome to run this. So what we do is we do the first hour. Chance will edit it with an intro and an outro. Links will be in the description, and you're free to post it out if you want to put it on your YouTube, your website. And you can
I was under the impression you're pre-recording.
This is pre-recording.
Then forget my request. My apologies.
Yeah, no problem, man. So I want to start with Psalm 19. I think it's one of the greatest indicators of the Astro-Theology of the Bible that there is. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament sheweth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night sheweth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it. And there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. I don't know how you can disassociate Jehovah with the sun in any sense with this particular verse. I mean, it's famous amongst flat earthers as well, referring to the firmament as it's put on the first NASA guy's tombstone. But yeah, that's basically what we're on about. Once again, we're going to be talking about the 12 patriarchs. I think it's pretty clear that the 12 apostles of Jesus are zodiacal, but maybe lesser known to the audience are the 12 patriarchs, or the great fathers of the tribes of Israel. And that's what this chapter that we've got coming up from Taylor is all about.
Well, I guess I'll throw in here. It is my personal point of view that what Taylor did is critically important. I often question whether Taylor lost his faith. At the end of the day, they beat the crap out of that man. They put him in jail. They did all kinds of things to this man. And he stood on principle and what he felt to be the truth. But in my view, there are more meanings in what we're about to talk about than just the astro-theological angle. And I just want to put that on the table. And also I want to put on the table that I hope the man did not lose his faith. At the end of the day, when you look at all the spiritual traditions around the world, to include Christianity, and by the way, in Christianity, there was a time when meditation was a big part of it. This is the vow of silence. This is the monks in their cells back in the day. You will often hear accounts of people reaching for enlightenment or heaven or whatever words you want to give it, that the last steps are imagination, that you use the human mind to take the last steps. And if you're aware of the kind of energy shift that we're engaged in right now, going into a higher frequency, or at least a good number of us, to include the animals and the plants are living and experiencing this too. What you're going to find is that the human mind creates our reality, co-creates our reality. And when you know this to be true, and then you consider what I just said about imagination, which has the word image right in it, I think these are critical points to consider while we're doing this, so that you don't just get a one-sided skew or the impression that what we're saying here is the writers of the Bibles were dirty pigs and they lied to us, and we need to drag all this stuff out back and have a bonfire. That is the furthest from my intention. There is value here, and from my point of view, what we're about to cover is one very critical angle of one of the meanings.
Yeah, that's well said. I agree that, well, I don't think Taylor lost his faith per se. I look at it like he lost his religion, and he, instead of having his God be the dogma of the church, he made truth itself his God, which is what God is. So, a scathing and vertiginous of burns that Taylor can dole out to the masses that he considers very lowly and brutish due to the ways that he's been treated, he still is serving that higher principle of truth. Now, about the acceptable year of our Lord, this phrase occurs in two places in the Bible, Isaiah chapter 61, verse 2, and Luke chapter 4, verse 19, the latter being just an echo of what was said in the former. And we can also infer that this year of our Lord may refer to the Synoptic Gospels, which are the ones that mostly agree with one another, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that Jesus taught for just 1 year, and that maybe was the year of our Lord in one sense. There are biblical scholars who call the discrepancies between the books the synoptic problem, asserting that there may have been another source document for all three that has not yet been identified. And we, of course, have identified it long ago. The document is the sky itself. I want to give a kind of longer reading from a part of Dylan's book, A God's Acre for Winds of the Soul, regarding this year of Jesus's teaching, where he says, Irenaeus and Papias are the only 2nd century Christians who refer to the 4 canonical Gospels. Irenaeus finished tutelage from Polycarp, an alleged disciple of the Apostle John. This is refuted in Smyrna, and was sent to Gaul to become the Bishop of Lyons. Prior to chapter 10 of book 3, Irenaeus only mentioned 2 of the Gospels. What is the reason for this? That he learned about the other Gospels and their characters while writing book 2, or that the Gospels didn't even come into existence until then, or that we're dealing with forgery or cover-ups of literature? His reaction to the other Gospels is telling, if they are his handiwork. He wrote, "It is not true that Jesus Christ died as early in life and after so brief a career. How is it possible that the Lord preached for only 1 year? If these words belong to Irenaeus, then the church patriarch wasn't even aware of the astrological symbolism of the Gospels and Christianity when he writes, quote, he, Jesus, therefore passed through every age, becoming an infant for infants, a child for children, thus sanctifying those who are of this, a youth for youths, and thus sanctifying them for the Lord. So likewise, he was an old man for old men, that he might be a perfect master for all, not merely as respects the setting forth of the truth, but also as regards age, sanctifying at the same time the aged also, and becoming example to them likewise. That at last he came to death itself, that he might be the firstborn from the dead. They, however, that they may establish their false opinion regarding that which is written, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, maintain that he preached for only 1 year and then robbed him of that age, and then suffered in the 12th month. They are forgetful to their own disadvantage, destroying his work and robbing him of that age which is both more necessary and more honorable than any other, that more advanced age, I mean during which also as a teacher he excelled all others. So this is coming from one of the earliest and most influential church fathers that there was. And this is the issue with the religious types, that they don't really have any idea what kind of contentious and argumentative foundations the doctrines of their church actually are standing upon. And they're kind of just stuck with the mainstream viewpoint that's been handed out for many generations now. But this is super important. I mean, it wasn't even agreed upon how long Jesus lived. This is where it gets obviously really confusing when you start conflating allegory for history, which is what the Bible basically is in most people's eyes.
There's a key point that I think directly addresses what you're bringing up here. The church, the Vatican, I mean, has spent an inordinate amount of energy controlling documents. Even, there's rumors of like the Cathars, they wiped them out, we're told. Anyone who had a differing point of view, and think about the Dead Sea Scrolls, supposedly how that whole thing came out. The Vatican was supposedly controlling it for a very long time until we got our hands on it. So what we know to be true is one of the very hubs where this information is going to come through is very invested in controlling the message and putting down the things that don't jive with the party line they want. And so when you have a situation like that, you're going to be bereft of a good answer because this is all done in secret, or most of it. And then you're going to begin to wonder, like you're pointing out a man who's an early church father who seems to be looking for a footing that he can't find. Well, how can that be, a man in a position like that? And I think it comes down to you can't possibly know all the things that they put down, hid, put in the basement, or, the like. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that, Dylan.
Well, so it's one of those things where if I can't make sense of it, I just leave it alone, put it on the back burner. Because for me, I'm not so much as interested in what was done behind closed doors as I am with what we can demonstrate. And so I want to catch you up to what we did last episode. I found from the historical record, and this is I just chased this down because Taylor mentioned it. Chance, can you bring up the Plutarch citation? Because I don't know if Crow saw this, but so you'll see there and highlighted, it says, Kiran yarkailen perses tonilion. Now that means literally the Persians called Helios Chiron, the sun. Chance, can you hover your mouse to the fourth word to the right from the top so Crow can see that? You see that, Crow, where he's moving?
I do. That's
Kyrus. 2 words over, Kyrus. So this is in the historical record, this has been dated 72 to 75 AD, which is the first century. And it's admitted by Plutarch. And when you look at the writers that we depend on for history are largely Greek. And there's very few that you can find that's going to be closer to when this happened that has more credibility than Plutarch. And what you'll see there is Helios, the sun, is called Kyrus. And Chance, could you bring up the Luke site? Just further down. Yeah, so Crow can see that. So right next to those images, you'll see that in Luke 4:18, it's translated as the Spirit of the Lord. Now, it's not the soul, because they use pneuma, which is wind or spirit or breath. And so it really means the spirit of Kyrio, which they translate as Lord or Master, but it's Kyrus. It even admits that it's from Kyrus, which is the Persian word for the sun. It's what they called the sun, Kyr. And you'll see that it's the exact same word as we say Cyrus, but it's Kyrus. Kyrus is Kyrus, just Latinized. And so that should be translated as the breath or spirit of the sun. Now he's talking about what sent Jesus, sent me to proclaim the favorable year of the sun. See the next one, Chance?
Which you are taking as literal, not allegorical in any way. So just so I'm on the straight.
Well, no. Actually, the literal translation, they're translating it as Lord. But I've just showed you the historical record. The literal word is not Lord, it's the sun. It's what the Persians called the sun.
Okay.
And furthermore, what they're translating as year, eniaton, is, you see it right next to it, means a cycle of time, or it's more of like an age or a duration, a cycle, right? So when you use the word year, the only thing that reckons the year is the sun.
Right.
So to leave that out would be the deception. And so the reason I wanted to point that out to you is because if you were to translate it like the context of it, it could just as easily be the breath or spirit of the sun, whatever one title ascribes to God or however one imagines the creator of this world to be, created that natural phenomenon we see in the sky known as the sun, so that it can reckon the cycle of time, beginning the seasons that we call a year. Now, the reason I wanted to bring that up to you is because of your latest work. Now, for anyone who's unfamiliar with Crrow, he's probably done more telescope work at the sun than anybody that I have access to. And one of the things he's been putting out there for his private members that you can go to Crrow777. It's Crrow777radio.com. And when you become a member, you can have access to all of his solar work and all that stuff. And what he's shown is there is a body in the sky additionally to the sun that can only be seen, generally speaking, with the right filters because it's a different spectrum of light. Am I saying that correct, or is that wrong?
You're close. I think the main reason that we can't see it with our eyes is the same reason you can't see the aspects of the sun that I show you. It's just too bright. There's too much energy, and it's too close to the right edge of the visual spectrum. While everything I show you is within the visual spectrum, it's right on the edge. And if you don't have the tools to knock out all the other, frequencies, all that energy and brightness, then you can't see it. And I think the other object is a bit dimmer, and I think it's most often lost in the glow of the sun that we're aware of.
But if it's all natural phenomena and it's legitimate, and it's not effects as you've shown it not to be, like effects of the lensing or the bullshit that people try to like dismiss it as.
Yep.
Well, then that passage becomes a little bit different in the gospel of, they say Luke, but the reality is Luke is exclusively a Latin word. It means light, but also when you spell it with a C as opposed to like the X, it's wood or the woods. So Lucus, Lucus, pertains to woods, and lux, you see like lucere, all these other things, it's going to relate to light. But it's just interesting to me that that Bible passage, the spirit of the sun hath sent me, the sun, to reckon its cycle. That might be an encoding of some of the stuff you're discovering, or it could just be speculation and coincidence. I don't know. But I wanted to put that out there. Now, Chance has been showing what Crrow means by the footage.
I'm sorry. This really kind of needs a description for folks. If you just watch it with no description, it doesn't mean much.
You want me to back it up?
If you want me to lay down, this is actually the first, or very close to the first time I found the other body. This is all the way back. And I lost my server stamps due to failed computers and bagging hard drives. I don't have my original timestamps, but I'm pretty sure it's 2015, though I think most places it got posted, say 2016. This is the sun. Look at the top of the frame. That's the other object that I'm searching for. I know it's there at this point. That is the sun we see with our eyes, shot in hydrogen alpha, the hydrogen alpha spectrum, which allows us to see certain things. There's the other object. Now, when I first did this, I thought, I can't quite bring it into focus for some reason. It's got to be lens flare. I did all these things. The problem I had at the time is I had many thousands of hours of nighttime telescope experience. I only had a few hundred hours with solar. And what happened to me when I posted the lunar wave, I didn't want to happen to me again. So when I introduced this, I did it very low key. Right here, I'm putting my hand over the end of the scope to try to do tests to see if I can prove that it's inside my etalon as a reflection or a flare of some kind. I take a long cardboard tube, put it over the end of the scope, and I begin to know this is actually there. What I can't prove is, could it possibly be a reflection on the firmament? By the way, that's lens flare that you're seeing on the side. Now we're back to the sun you see in the hydrogen alpha wavelength. Sometime later, a man named Chris Van Matre replicates what I've done here, though the other object, which I'll just refer to as the second sun, because of what the SLU Observatory has said, he replicates it. And this object, the other sun, the second sun, is in a different location. I think he did it in Colorado. Sometime later, and by the way, this is 2016, where the SLU Observatory clip is also going to happen that you'll see later. He goes to a flat earth conference. A lady named Cami Nodell brings polarizing filters because she's very knowledgeable about light and filters and such. Chris Van Maitre finds the other object, the second sun. Cami Nodell puts a polarizing filter on the scope and instantly proves this is not a reflection off the firmament. This is not a glare. This is not something other. It is a body. And for those who don't know about polarized filters, just think of a pair of sunglasses. What do? By the way, that's probably what you're seeing there is probably a telephone line. I forget, but that line is like a telephone line or something in the way. You can see it on the regular sun too, which proves that it's something in between me and what I'm looking at. But to get back to the point, at that point, with sunglasses, it removes reflections and glints and glare. There's more to it than that. But at this point, we know it's a body. I'm going to make a couple of observations that are just observations. At this point, I began to wonder if the MasterCard logo is symbolizing this, because it looks exactly like that. As you can see, the sun we see has a yellowish tinge to it and the other one is red. Almost always when you're looking through a scope with filters, it looks like that. Then I began to wonder when Luke from Star Wars was on Tatooine. I mean, it looks just like that. Slightly smaller, slightly dimmer, and a slightly different color. But then I had become aware of the Vedic work from India. And I think they're probably correct, but it will need proving. They say there's a binary to our sun. They say when that binary gets close to us, our consciousness explodes upward. They say that when the binary goes far away from us, our consciousness plunges into darkness. And we have, like the Kali Yuga, the Dark Ages, the Iron Ages, which supposedly we're just coming out of now. That's a lot to put on the table, but it's what you need to think about until you see the SLU Observatory. When you see the SLU Observatory, you're looking at an observatory in 2016 that live streamed the sun with a hydrogen alpha rig. Maybe it's in white light. I think it's in white light, which just means they took a regular camera and knocked down the surface brightness with a filter by 98% or something like that, because you can see the sunspots and nothing else.
Left, you can see the small black dot, which is just to the right of center of the sun. That is the tiny orb of Mercury. Mercury, you now know so many interesting and fascinating facts from SLU astronomer Bob Berman. You'll be able to tell all your friends. Maybe asking yourself, what is that large round thing to the right of the sun? Well, that's our second sun. I don't know if you knew that we had a second sun, but there it is. It's normally hidden from view. NASA and other organizations, they usually hide that stuff away from us. They don't tell us the truth, but there it is. It's true. Anyway.
Sun, and by the way, NASA knows all about it. They just don't want me talking about it or you knowing about it. And he calls it the second sun. The other thing I will mention is after I covered this a number of times, because this is a pretty big proof coming from an observatory. The problem that I will always have is I'm just some guy with a telescope. To get back to the point, this starts to show up in forums and people are commenting. And I keep seeing these comments that say, well, the astronomer was just joking. And when I track those little comment providers back, I began to realize these are bots. These are AI bots trying to skew the conversation, which happens in nearly every forum at this place. By the way, so people know, it is estimated that there are far more AI bots on the web than there are human beings at this point. So there's all that. I'll shut up.
Have you seen what's happening as of like yesterday and like the things that are, stuff that we've known for a long time? I learned about the bots back in, I think, 2017. Someone who I knew was getting into it, and she showed me like the hashtags you could follow on Twitter where all the bots are like, the older bots are training the younger bots and like sharing music and pop culture and stuff. It's friggin' wild. But it's all come out as of yesterday that the government is funding a lot of these big media, quote unquote, they're using taxpayers' dollars to fund all this stuff to steer perception. And that's how people are like, how are some people be able to fail so many times? And it's like they're failing upward. Like no matter how bad their quality of their content is, they still succeed and get all these numbers. They're seeing that a lot of it's funded. And so it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of that bot stuff is also funded or with mismanagement could do that.
People need to wake up. And I'm going to say a couple things that are blunt, and some people will be upset, but I'm not here to worry about that. We're facing the biggest shift in human life on this planet that we're aware of in human history, other than maybe the supposed Great Flood. Donald Trump is here to manage the fall of America. His little co-star, Elon Musk, is here. Well, I like to say this. Old McElon had a farm, AIAIO. He's here to implement the tracking and real-time policing with technology as part of what he's going to do. The first day, the Orange Man, as I refer to him, showed up to begin looking like a savior and doing things that really backed.
Hold on, Crow, real quick. Don't say any no words, because this podcast isn't about geopolitics or anything. I know I just say what you're going to say, but I want to steer us away from all this modern stuff. So
okay.
Don't none of this modern stuff that's going to get people censored, because I want people to be able to share this and clip it however they want. You know what I mean? Say what you're going to say. Say what you're going to say.
The only point I'm going to make here is on day one, you were told that free speech was coming back. That very same time, TikTok was taken over. And when it came back, people complained, how come I can't see stuff about California? How come I can't see all these things? The man who put that bill in place to take it over was caught in an elevator saying this is the greatest propaganda tool that's ever been created. What's going to happen here is AI is going to censor in real time. Everyone's going to have their own AI agent. You already do, some of us on our phones and other things, which makes the most complete dossier that's ever been created. And they're going to control the narrative. And by the time we get down to Gen whatever they call them, Z or whatever, they will have been completely programmed, because the internet will have been completely controlled, and the younger generation do not read books like Chance and Dylan do. Matter of fact, many of them can't, because they don't have the attention span anymore. I will shut up and I won't go modern anymore, and you can clip that if you need to.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We're not here to like censor or anything like that. We want to stick to the point, because we're going to do some really great work in this podcast, and I don't want it to get overshadowed by controversy.
I hear you.
And my work here is kind of like what you do, is like in certain regards with your scope. We try to eliminate controversy so that there's no argument, right? Like you can't argue that with that historical record from Plutarch. You can't argue with the Greek of the Bible that it literally is using it. So we just try to resolve that stuff and equip people to look at it so they don't argue with each other. That being said, we're all into that stuff. But what you just said is crucial, which is why I wanted to bring you guys on here for this, is because people don't read books. It's very rare. So what are we going to do? We're going to go through Taylor's work, and they're going to hear Taylor's work live literally through us as we read the most important parts of this chapter, which was called the this chapter is called the 12 Patriarchs, but the work, for anybody who wants to look it up, it's all going to be linked in my show notes. It's called the
Astronomico-Theological. Astronomico-Theological Lectures. I want to also put a couple things on the record real quick too. Yeah. Another early church father, highly influential, called Origen, in his commentaries on Genesis. I had to translate this, kind of was sketchy, Google Translate and other sites to double check the work, because it's in Latin. But he says, therefore, it can be understood in this way, that in the prayer of Joseph, it is said by Jacob, he reads in the tables of heaven whatever happens to you and your children, because it will also be folded like a book. So kind of to take that out of the bad English, he's saying that at the point of Genesis, where the patriarch of patriarchs, the great father of many nations, Kronos, Jacob, Israel, is giving his blessings and curses to his 12 tribes or his 12 zodiac houses or his 12 sons, that he's reading the prophecies about his children essentially as you would read a book out of the heavens. And Taylor, to quote him in this chapter, he says the astronomical illustrations, as in constellations and stars, supplied the place of history, that each individual was believed to have a particular star or group of stars that presided over his nativity and that would continue over him as a guardian through his life and receive him into his own bright sphere of happiness and glory after death. Now, beyond that, when we think of astrology, especially what's trendy, we think of fortune telling, what they call judicial astrology in the old writing, predicting the future. And a point that I like to bring up is that to the actual astronomer priests of the old world, it was a two-way street. It wasn't just about understanding what was coming next in the cycle of this year or of the cycle of whatever age that they were in, micro and macrocosm, but also there was a hindsight applied to astrology that if you could derive information out of the stars for the future, that you could also read history in the stars. And this is what he's basically saying. Taylor's saying that the astronomical illustrations supplied the place of history. Now, Crrow, I want to introduce you to this book if you haven't heard of it before. I think it'll be one of the greatest resources you could pick up anytime soon. It's called The Celestial Code of Scripture, the Astral Cipher underlying the miracle stories of the Bible and Quran. So this guy, he's I've had him on the show several times.
Can you throw that in the chat, please?
Absolutely. I'll link it to you.
I'm all in.
Yeah. So this guy has uncovered, and Dylan, I understand too that there's questions about the provenance of cuneiform and all the artifacts that come from Mesopotamia. But, regardless of where they originate on the timeline, these writings are perfectly evident of the system of the priesthood, where McHugh here, who's fluent in the cuneiform text, has demonstrated a lot of different passages where the esoteric secret of their mythology and their astrology and their histories is kind of let out of the bag by a few different tablets. They call this practice Lumashi, which is that the stars themselves are a text, and that the relationship between the names of constellations and the names of different stars in more than one language, and the wordplay and the puns especially, that constitutes divine revelation. And this is explanatory factor to why you have four gospels that are somewhat similar, but that have, like say in the example of the book of Matthew and the book of Luke, completely different nativity stories for Jesus, almost like it's two different stories, or the two accounts of creation in Genesis, that basically the actual scripture was the stars, and then people were translating what they could read up there, and especially the wordplay that they could infer, and that was getting put down in writing as the scriptures that we have here on earth, if that makes sense. And McHugh shows this, absolutely proves it through Greek stories, through the Quran. In the Quran, it actually it even says that Muhammad received the Quran from celestial tablets. I don't know how you could get much more clear than that. And then in particularly like the specific and bizarre details of the miracle stories, like Samson killing 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass. Where does that come from? Well, that's the donkeys in and around the Cancer constellation is where that's coming from. So I just want to put that book on your radar. I will get a direct link to you for that. And even if you want to talk to Professor John McHugh on your show sometime, I'm sure he'd be open to that.
I've already ordered it. Thank you.
Awesome. It's a good one.
And that's important because we just talked about the sun being Chiron.
Oh, wow.
Which is Quran. So it's literally there. And we talked about this last episode.
In Kronos too.
In Keren, which it means horn and radiance in Hebrew. And so the reason we brought that up is because Muhammad's known for destroying the 360 idols at Mecca. That's the old year. So they realized that's off. So they had to change the cycle up or change the reckoning of the year up. So that's where what I believe is encoding in that story. Crrow, real quick, Your mic's been open certain points, so just be cognizant because we can hear that shift. Chance, do you have the ability to filter this stuff out? Like,
Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
Oh, you could hear my keyboard.
Yeah, so don't do anything like devious or don't like when you shift. We can hear it when just so you don't get embarrassed.
Devious Crrow.
He can filter it out. So I guess we're good. But
I was just sitting here. I think all I did was type. Did you hear something else?
Well, no, but like when you shift and stuff, we can hear. But we can hear it. So like if you're not talking, if you can pop yourself on mute, that would be great. It will help. But if he can filter it out, I was just thinking because
one of the good things about AI is that Adobe's got this speech enhancer tool that you just pop your audio file in, and it comes out the other end sounding like it was recorded in a professional studio, even if they were on a crappy laptop mic 5 feet away from the computer. It's crazy.
Awesome. All right. Well, Crrow, so do you want to kick us off reading the first couple paragraphs right underneath the slew? You see the Taylor wrote. Do you want to start it off, or do you want Chance or me to do it?
Okay, let me see here. Let me catch up where you are. These notes.
The real value in this for us, or for me anyway, is that if I ever want to refresh myself, I can go back and listen to it. I don't ever have to look at it again. And I can see, and it's fun because it'll be listening to you guys say it, you know what I mean? Or me, you know what I mean? So this is like an audiobook experience with us commenting.
Okay, so we're going to pick up on the astrology lecture from Taylor, beginning on page, looks like 299.
Yes, sir.
Carrying through to 300. Here we go. Though there was no confirmatory document and no history whatever has made the least mention of any of these personages or their adventures, yet there was no counter or contradictory history. Nobody could prove the negative. And as they must have had some, as they must have had some ancestors or been descended from somebody or something, why might not the stars have been their forefathers, or believed to contain the genii or genii or souls of the forefathers? And why might not the curious and entertaining illustrations which the astronomical priests gave of the starry heavens be the real history, in the absence of all other history, of the progenitors of mankind? Making a direct corollary between the supposed personages and the allegorical sky clock. Do we want to address this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly what Chance just highlighted with the Lukashi. How do you say it?
The Sumerian word was Lumashi.
Oh, Lumashi. That's it, right?
So I want to ask a question. As Chance makes the associations with Kronos, and at the same time we're making associations with Sol or the sun, where's that dividing line?
Kronos is the sun. It wasn't until much later on that the planet that we call Saturn, or the watering star that we call Saturn or Kronos, was given that name. It had a different name in the ancient world. Kronos is stated by many different authors to be the sun or the soul of the world. I think the best place to go back and understand how all of these concepts mesh together and you syncretize Jove and Kronos together, etc., that the father is the son and whatnot. That is probably my favorite source is probably the Orphic hymns. Not a very long read, but the author in a pre-Plato text goes through every god and goddess known to the world at that time, pretty much. And they all have the same attributes of being the creator of the world, the firstborn of the first cause, et cetera, et cetera.
So like saying the Kronos of our era, almost?
Right, exactly. The Kronos was the reincarnating savior or spirit of each age.
Got it.
So, different names and different systems, but that each time he reincarnates at the close and the beginning of the next world age. And those cycles had different, gauges of time for different factions of the priesthood throughout history.
Have you guys read any of the old Steiner stuff? Because what you're talking about right here, there's a particular Steiner work that has it's a book that has hierarchies in the title where they talk about, and this is probably not just the Rosicrucian point of view. I think it fans out a little broader than that, but they talk about how the solar system came into being and they start with a Saturn, and then they move through showing how suns are made, how things that were suns become this and that. And I think it might be spot on to the specificity you were pointing out about calling Kronos the association of the sun in our era, where when most people hear Kronos, they're thinking, oh, we're talking about Saturn here. So I think you might want to, I'll get the name of the book. As a matter of fact, if you guys want to go for a minute, I'm going to grab the name of that book and get it to you.
Well, real quick. We'll do all that after. We'll put it all in the links, everything. But so I attack this from, or I enucleate it. Oh, Crow, pop your keys.
Oh.
I enucleate it from a historic standpoint. In the historical record, one of the writers we depend upon is Eusebius, one of the Greek writers. And he cites Porphyry that Kronos is the Phoenicians called Kronos Israel. So when you hear Kronos in Israel, you're thinking of time. So when you see like the God of Israel, it's the God of time. It's and who reckons the time? The sun. And it's 12 tribes, or it's 12 apostles, or it's 12 patriarchs, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where
Who's
it comes
the father
from.
of the gods of the Greeks? 12 gods of that pantheon is Kronos. Who's the father of the 12 tribes of Israel? Is Israel.
So what you're pointing out here is very interesting, because most people take the kind of Hebrew edge to be associated with Saturn ideas. And I know you're familiar with the old idea. Well, we call Saturn Kronos because it's the furthest away. It moves the slowest through the sky. Oh, and then there's the Greek myths, So the distinction that you're making is a pretty critical distinction, because if you're spot on the money, I think that the older ideas are purposefully allowed to be associated forward, because at the end of the day, when you're reading scripture, and if you're a no-nonsense person and you read the words, the acceptable year of the Lord, what are we talking about? The sun gives us a year. There is no other way that I'm aware of to mark it. And yet our frame of mind for most of us is never going to make that leap. And so I'm just saying that the distinction you're making, it's a pretty critical distinction.
And
go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say, if that source can be depended on, and Israel was a Phoenician word for Kronos, then you're looking at the latest stage of that would be about like 300 BC. And it lines up with like the 2nd century BC when they changed the name. Because if you look at like Plato's work, he admits that he just says that the planets belong to the gods, but they didn't have names back then. They developed names in Alexandria, and then you see like the old name of Saturn was Pheno, and this would be found in the works of Firmicus.
What is the name, Dylan?
It would be Faeno. I got this from the last book written on astronomy, or astrology, I should say, before Rome converted to Christianity. It's Firmicus, I believe. What the heck's the name? Matthesios Libri 8 or something like that. But basically, they all had names in Alexandria to the 2nd century BC, and then they got converted sometime around then after to then these modern archetype gods, which they just recycled old names for the deity and ascribed them to planets that were no longer in use. So that's where you get like the Jupiter, the Kronos, or the Zeus, all that stuff. But where I wanted to just say is, when you are talking about Israel as a location, the earliest that can be is around the 3rd century BC. And what problems does cuneiform have? It talks about Israel as a location, not as the Phoenician context of the word.
That's a critical point in light of what, yeah. I mean, you're talking to a man who spent God knows how many hours reading 12 Sitchin books, and until life grabbed me by the lapel, smacked me across the face and said, why aren't you looking at this critically? Why aren't you soaring up to 1,000 feet and looking back down for a big picture and realizing this is a put up? This cannot possibly be as we're being told for even just simple logical reasons, like if the history of the world was given, there would be a line of people around the block to learn this, among other things. And then as you follow it down, but that is a critical point, because we know that every time our military boots hit the ground in that part of the world, all of a sudden the museums come up empty. And, so there is a critical attention being paid, which automatically tells you anything that we're being told openly about it needs to be questioned.
And sorry, Chance, go ahead.
I'll just say, this is conjectural on my end, but think about how the modern entertainment complex manufactures history for everybody, to believe in through movies and whatnot. And then consider the type of pastimes those who were literate and had time for entertainment would have had in the past. A lot of that is studying scriptures, Indiana Jones style exploration of old ruins and artifacts and whatnot. And I think it's very plausible that at different points throughout history, like at that bottleneck of the Alexandrian church and them sending out their apostles throughout the world to enforce the system, as we've done a lot of work on in the past, or Napoleon going into Egypt and to possibly the very late in the game discovery of all this cuneiform stuff, that there could have very well been an industry of manufactured artifacts that was basically headed by the priesthood. We actually see this in the Renaissance era when the so-called humanist literature was introduced, while like Pope Leo put out a bounty for a bag of gold on any ancient Greek or Roman text, in which so many forged pieces of writing came forward and then entered the historical canon as if they were absolutely real, even though they're provably sketchy or absolutely forgery, that are now just circulated still for hundreds of years as if they were part of the historical record. So once these things get into like the collective consciousness of humanity, it doesn't even matter their provenance. They are now part of the story. And I think that there's been like potentially intentional obfuscation done through basically different versions of entertainment at different eras of history, including ancient texts, which were like the big pastime and collector's item during the Renaissance, for example.
Even marbles. I know Dylan's read the text I'm going to mention. I think he values it a little less than I do, but that's for different reasons, because to me, the astronomical associations in the timeline are what's important. But there's a book called The Worship of Augustus Caesar, which is very unique and a book that could never be made in our era. But it talks endlessly about faked monuments. And what he's saying here is people got a hammer and chisel and changed marble. So to underscore what you're saying, which is much more doable than changing a marble monument, he said this was not only commonplace, it was damn near universal, which is why when we find that coin that doesn't fit or dig up that monument that doesn't fit, it's such a big deal.
Yeah, these artifacts or texts that were most acceptable to the current dogmas of the time were the ones that became accepted and circulated as canonical. So essentially, if you were going to make your bag of gold from the Pope, bringing him a supposed lost text from Plato or something, it would be worth a lot more and a lot more likely to be purchased by Rome if it supported their current doctrine. Right. And so then the church has these so-called artifacts that they can say, look, we're just this is our authority is derived from this old stuff. And it's this crazy circular revision of history.
And if you notice, it's always retroactive. You notice how they always find the artifacts after they have established the history to conform that,
yes,
versus finding the artifacts and then trying to see what they teach us. And just to kind of touch on what Crrow said, especially with the worship of Augustus Caesar, well, a lot of this is the thing we're dealing with. When I started, the reason like I learned the languages and all this stuff is so I could see it for myself. I don't even think that it's as devious as people. We like guys like us. We're like, oh my God, we find out we catch you lying, we know you're up to something, right? But a lot of it, I think, is it's all guesswork. And the problem is nobody in the authority positions has the humility to say, hey, we're guessing. we're guessing that this is written at this time based on this. It's almost like if you were to look at like, if somebody a couple hundred years or a couple thousand years from now was looking at the language of us in America, right? In the 90s, there was lingo, at least where I lived in Newport, Rhode Island, where people would say like, oh, mad respect, yo, or mad, that was sick, right? You skateboarding, that was nasty. You know, you talk like that. If you know other texts or other accounts that talk like that, but it's only to that era, you know it's from the 90s, 1990s. And if they're skateboarding, you know based on what kind, if they mention any description of the skateboards, you know whether that's early 90s because they still were using boards from the late 80s, or if it's late 90s and they had more modern board. There's so many things, but the problem is it's all guesswork. And nobody has the humility to just say, we're doing our friggin' best. No, it's like this happened and you will accept it or not. And Origen, who you cited earlier, his work got condemned to the flame as he got convicted as a heretic later on. So he went from being in to now like, you know, you're out. Everything's burned. It's illegal to have his work. So
Not to mention the idiomatic aspect of the scriptures indicates Latin idioms and much later speech patterns than what we're told these things come from.
Good point. And what happens when this goes down and then a generation, if we're going to call it 20 years, which I think they are these days, then where is it? It's even further removed from any scrutiny because for 20 years, this has been what we pick up and accept. But it's a good point. There's a book out there called the Lamsa Bible, which was written by a man who claims to read the original Aramaic, have grown up in a place where they still spoke the language. And he says it's all about the idioms. And do you remember some of that, Dylan? It's like not being English and being told there's bats in the belfry and having no way other than say, well, why would bats be up in the bell tower? When in fact, what we all know that means is you're crazy. But there's no way to draw that bridge. And that's what you're talking about. Because you have to have knowledge of the culture or something similar to that to even have a clue.
And what you're saying is something I try to impart on our audiences is that these languages, even the translating of them is guesswork. I just showed you that they drastically mistranslated something that's so clearly abundant or so clearly obvious if you know of Plutarch, right?
Plus perfection will even lose meaning, as you know.
Yeah.
And so there's no way around it.
And that's kind of like the lesson that God teaches us while we're here, right? Because the year is not perfect. It's something that it can almost never be perfectly doled out. There's always going to be a little, because it's so fractional to not being precise. But in that, it is perfect. So I think that's kind of like a cool, that's what I love about when I contemplate some of this stuff. But just to go back to what you're saying is, I lost my train of thought. We'll just keep going.
We're talking about bats in the belfry.
Idiomatic.
Right.
All languages. So that's what I did is I started studying these alphabets and stuff. And you see that there is a priestly system. They're actually all the same system. Where they get different is the idioms and then a process called transposition, which is kind of like anagrams, where they'll take certain parts of the words and reverse them or whatever else. And then they'll slap on terminations for context as it gets more complicated, or prefixes, all that stuff. But at the core, they're the same system. And that's what's really, really interesting from somebody who's interested in cultural diffusion like I am. But let's keep going because this is really fun. And Crow, you want to keep reading or you want a chance to go?
I actually want to be a pain in your butt and ask one question. And I'm not trying to sideline. And this goes to the roots of what we're doing here. How do you feel about Taylor's addressing of what language the original Bible gets copied out of? We're told, just so I can tell what I think is correct, we are all told that it came out of Greek, and that's what we accept as true. Go ahead, Dylan, because I know you have a point of view. It's
100%. He's right. And this is what we have to be grateful and celebrate.
He's right how?
Yeah.
So
clarify.
The first thing I would say is spell Christianos in Greek and then tell me the problem with it. It's allegedly the word Christian, Christianos, is a Greek root, Chris, which means good, and anos, which is a Latin termination, and it's claimed to be a Greek word that was created by Greeks. It's written in the Greek Bible, claimed to be the original as Greek, but it's Latin. And I learned this from Archbishop Richard Trench. So this isn't even a Taylor thing. He's right. The Bible that we have, the Greek version of it, it's only a product of like the 1500s with Erasmus. And all the learned bishops saw the problem with Erasmus didn't have the full documents, and he made up specifically John's Revelation and the Apocalypse. He made up a lot of stuff in that. So that's one of those things that isn't reliable, because instead of leaving portions of it blank and just having the humility to say, we don't have this, he filled it in himself. And so there's a lot of, that is forgery. Now, it might be well-intended forgery, but it's forgery. And you see a lot of that. And then the Old Testament, the vehicle is Greek. And going back to what you're saying about the Aramaic, I don't think anybody can produce original documents of the Aramaic. I think that is, I'm not going to make claims because I don't want to speculate on something that hasn't been brought to my attention. But you don't see anybody of any of these ancient accounts talking about Aramaic in fact, you don't see any of this stuff being mentioned by any of the Greek writers at the times when it would have been most relevant. And that's
Mel Gibson does it.
Yeah.
So just Jesus himself, the way it's written in Greek ends with upsilon sigma, and that is not a Greek termination either.
Right. Even when he comes at Jesus, saying that that's a Roman terminator. But Dylan, just to be clear, just so there's no speculation. So we're told there's this Greek manuscript that was the original, and we lost it. But look, we have this perfect copy, and that's where all our scripture has come from. So be concise and clear. What's your view on accepting or not accepting that?
So it's just it's products of the Middle Ages. There is, in fact, no original or documents of the New Testament in Hebrew that was allegedly copied and translated into Greek. It just doesn't exist. It's all a product of the Middle Ages from a historian's perspective. And that's what I try to
written in what language?
It's written technically in Greek, but it's from people with a Latin disposition, because they make those mistakes, like I just showed you with Christianos. That's a Latin word, and all they did is just transliterate it into Greek letters, and it's replete with that. There's also typos in Hebrew too, so it's there. Like, for example,
the Old Testament is the same way, that it's the Hebrew. The oldest copies of the Old Testament that I'm aware of are in Greek, the Septuagint, if I'm not mistaken.
So the reason I did this, there was method to my madness. In Robert Taylor, we were so fortunate to have a man educated in the way he was, speaking the languages, having an actual astronomical background where he can say, hey man, that star we call Spica or Spica, which represents the corn in Virgo's hand, that is what we're reading here is that's rising at this time. So the specificity of his knowledge base, I would almost call that God-given. Like for that to happen is almost like the hand of God said, it's time to address these things. Here's my point. For these texts to be so thoroughly encoded and Taylor to actually show the correspondence to the sky clock, which is astronomy, which is way too complicated for most people to even tackle, tells you something about the veracity of these texts. And that's the critical point, because we can argue, it is a funny story. Well, we had this Greek original. Oh, sorry, we lost it, but we got this perfect, replica. That's not the point. The point is we have these things. And I mean, if you don't have over a 200 IQ, you're not writing this. And to be fair, I know for a fact places like the Jesuits only took on the smartest of the smartest. Some of these people speaking 14 languages. But my point was, I don't think most people realize the level of astronomical information that we're talking about. And without a man like Taylor, I don't think we'd know.
And you also have to recognize that the people writing it that was a profession. So oftentimes they might not have known the encoding. It was being dictated them by somebody more important that did know. And that may be where some of the confusion gets in when they're trying to like articulate it, and they're mistranslating it because like, nah, that doesn't really work. I know that's what he wanted, but it doesn't work like that in this language. So they kind of did their own thing with it. But I wanted to let's
Dylan,
keep going.
if we can,
All right, I'll go. You want me to go?
let's get down to the to the point of the free to paid break, and kind of just chug through that, maybe even in a somewhat condensed form.
Yeah, keep reading, Crow. You have a great voice for it. It's awesome to hear Taylor's words coming through your voice.
All right, here we go, guys. Thus were the stars their fathers, and thus were the phenomena which the priest described in relation to the stars supposed to be in the real history of what had occurred in those from this weird language, from those whom they believed themselves to have descended. The names which the priest gave to distinguish one star from another passed for the names of their particular ancestors, associating star to individual, while the priests, by their manner of turning their eyes up, and like Saint Stephen, gazing steadfastly into the heaven, all the while that they were discoursing about these imagined fathers of mankind, gave a sufficient hint to those who had wit enough to look to that doesn't make sense. Those who had wit enough to look to the actions rather than the words, as to what the real nature of those fathers was, and where the text, their marvelous history, was to be found. And actually, this opens up another door. You know how in biblical people getting interested in the scriptures, they always go for the name and what did the name mean? Well, think about what this means when you're associating a star with an individual. That star often has a story to tell. And I think, Dylan, you've kind of cracked into that a little.
Yeah, and I think going back to you don't need to have a 200 IQ to write this. You just need to know different languages. It's like Morse code. If two people know Morse code, they can communicate to each other under the radar. It's very similar to that. And as you do this, you'll get the IQ. You'll learn to see it more, which is why I tell people to learn the different alphabets, because then you can see it for yourself. And then with the philological letter swaps, you can see how like KYR, KUR, CYR, they're all the same thing, just being presented in different cultures.
Take over the reading for, I've done a lot of reading out loud in my life.
No, I'm good. Sorry that I'm gelling out. But anyhow, I wanted to point out some people have made the argument that when you're reading these stories, there were these priests who had the keys to the story. So when they were telling it, they actually knew what was being referenced in the sky clock. And it was a way for them to hide things like being able to predict an eclipse as an example or something like that. I mean, how do you feel about that?
That's a very, I'm not saying that's wrong, but that's kind of like a good Hollywood, Mel Gibson's Apocalypto type of interpretation. And that may be the case. I mean, we've known just throughout time that the philosophers always wrote esoterically. I think in part to defend themselves against people that wouldn't understand, to defend the secrets of their trade. Ultimately, it's that. I think it's really similar. Actually, in our previous episode, we talked about, and Taylor even uses the direct terms or the direct phrase terms of art in relationship to the word Lord and apostles, and how various professions, interestingly enough, related to the priestcraft in some way or another, like lawyers and doctors, they always couch their discourse amongst themselves in their jargon, or what it's called terms of art in legalese. I'm sure you're very familiar with this. And particularly the priests of various cultures using so-called dead languages for their scriptures is another way to protect the encoding of what's going on there from the slippage of so-called living languages, changing the meanings of words and idioms over time.
And it doesn't even matter if those languages were ever spoken languages or not. It's a code for them. It's a mechanism.
And yet your comment about the church father trying to find his footing demonstrates that someone high up and right there would probably have no idea of what we're talking about.
Yeah. And one of the things Chance touched upon that I think is the big thing to remember with everything all the way up into the modern era. I don't think it's as personal where they're lying to us or they're lying. Somebody's, because I think when people start learning about this, they take it personally and they're like, how dare they lie to me? But it's like, no, this is the business of empire. So if you want to have an empire, you have to keep things that give you that tactical advantage a secret. So what do you have to do? You have to put the opposite ideas out, almost the inverted ideas, to throw people off the scent. Because if they knew the real way, how you use celestial navigation, how you acquired elevation angles to objects in the sky, how you measured plotted degrees of latitude and longitude, all that stuff. If people knew that, then they can compete with you. If they know how to build a boat, they can compete with you.
Good point.
And so what are empires founded on, Dylan? Historically speaking, they're founded on their own history, especially that of bloodlines, being descended from a god or having the divine right of kings, or just the authority that derives from the direct transmission father to son of a particular noble or royal family. And that's one of the interesting things about this Lumashi or star scripture. Going back to the priesthood of old, they were all astronomers, of course, and even the foundational myths of ancient Greece written by a guy named Homer, whose name could be translated literally to mean hostage. This is probably a reference to the fact, and this is something that McHugh gets into in this book, that when one nation or kingdom would take over and conquer another, one of the very first things that they would do in establishing that they now rule this region was to take the astronomer priests hostage, like Homer hostage. And then you get those guys to come up with the history derived from the truth in their eyes of the history that's in the stars, the history of the new rulership that proves that they have the right to be there, like where they came from, what gods they descended from, etc. So this is something like every empire has to do at the turning of age or cycle, or you could say the corporate rebranding of leadership of basically a ancient universal ecclesiastical system that the church is built upon far, far beyond antiquity to the actual Romish church that we call Catholicism, that you got to take over a region and then rewrite the history. And what's the best place to do that where it's going to resonate with everybody on like a unconscious psychic level is through the archetypal patterns that are encoded in the sky clock that reflect the psychological structure of each human mind in the microcosm.
Almost like I want to take this place over, so I've got to ensure they know nothing about the influences from above. And that resonated all the way to our time. Who was it? One of the big robber barons who owns one of the banks said, astrology is not for millionaires, it's for billionaires. And
just so you know, I have to stop you. That quote it doesn't exist in the historical record.
Oh, are you kidding?
Yes. There's a lot of stuff like that I've had to chase down. This is why Chance and I do this now, because that
like
one,
every
what's the other
Tesla quote on the internet?
Yeah. The 3-6, the secret of the universe is 3, 6, and 9 test that he never wrote that. It's not exist. What is in the historical record is he did have an astrologer. He did visit a woman who was his astrologer and she communicated with him. But that's all you see in the letter. He never says that quote. So just be mindful of that.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is we take so many things for granted.
I thought I saw the original interview where that was pulled from. That's how crazy that is.
No, JP Morgan, I don't know if they were
doing Mandelu'd
back then.
Yeah, really. Yeah. I'll have to drop that one. Anyhow, let's keep going. Of which St. Paul, ever and anon, gives us the broadest hints that ever were in the world, and which, if experienced, had not shown the stupidity of the religious world is absolutely infinite. One would have thought that the stupidity itself could not have mistaken, as he says, set your affections on things above, that is, to be sure upon the stars, which you see so high above your heads. We going on?
Yeah.
Chance,
I'll take over. I'd love to do some reading.
All right, go ahead.
And our conversation is in the heavens. That is, all that we discourse about is the science of astronomy. Dylan's note, I'm not sure how the word conversation was derived from a word that means state, region, or government, as, he's got the image of the actual Bible verse here. but it seems to be a common translation. It could easily be translated as the state or region of heaven. Taylor continues, and moreover, brethren, I would not have you ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud. This is 1 Corinthians 10:1. Taylor continues, why, to be sure, and O God's name, they were under the cloud, and of a cloudy night you cannot see any of them. And all passed through the sea, and all were baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea. The very phenomena which we see ourselves and could hardly describe in any other language as occurring to the stars, which are continually baptized or dipped or ducking behind the cloud as the cloud passes over them, and ducking in right earnest as we see them set or go down behind the waves of the Western Ocean. Dylan's note here, in some parts of Italy, where I suspect these stories actually originated, the entire baptism can be seen, both of the stars being dipped and then being saved from the waters. The rising and the setting.
Crow, you're going to love this because you preface this how there's more than one meaning in a lot of things. And so in the alchemical sense, metal corresponds to the moon. Quicksilver corresponds to the moon. And when you look at the word for moon, it's Yareak. And that's where Jericho is derived. And you mean
just silver, by the way, not quicksilver, because that's
quicksilver. Yeah, sorry, silver. Sorry, I'm paraphrasing and looking at my notes. I'm not actually reading. Well, when it says that 7 times around Jericho, before the walls fell, they wandered around or they marched around it. That context, it only makes sense if you understand how silver used to be purified, and it used to be purified and refined 7 times. And so if you don't understand that back then, you're not going to be able to translate. And it goes back to that, how the guesswork of dating is okay, when was the time that they had to purify silver and refine it that many times to get it?
This Hebrew word that we get in English is Jericho. The actual spelling, Yad, Resh, Hey, right? Is that Hey or Het? It's hard to tell. But regardless, it's like a word for the, yeah, it's Het. It's a word for the moon. Jericho is actually a word for the moon.
I've just got to sit here and doff my hat to you, gentlemen. I mean, the specificity and the linguistics that you're throwing in this, it's impressive.
It comes from being burned, Crow. It comes from literally repeating stuff we thought we could trust, only to find out that
I just did.
No, right. But if you hear an educated, learned person, like someone like Robert Taylor, I chase this shit down. Everything here I've chased down and confirmed that he's correct. There's a bunch of stuff that we'll leave on the cutting room floor because it was not correct. It's really easy to make mistakes in this. And that's why I don't
And easy for Taylor to make mistakes. He didn't have the internet, but now
he didn't have this luxury.
Yeah, we've learned the hard way that if we're going to share any specific details to try to prove our point, we need to go get the receipts on that. And it's doable nowadays.
It's a critical point, but the amount of effort that you put in to do this, it's impressive. And I would point out that while you may regurgitate something like I just did, and it'll fly for the moment, there will probably come a time in the future when that's not so slippery sliding by, where people will start to say, well, look, if this stupid faux pas was made, what else is here? So, I mean, I applaud what you're doing.
And that's why I love our audience, is because actually most of the time we make a slip, somebody in his comments or my comments will have chased it down and let us know.
I make at least 10 mistakes like every episode.
I wish I had that real-time turnaround. I usually find out after the fact, and I just have to come in and say, well, I blew it, which I try to do.
But that's okay, because that's what will make people trust you, though. It's when you don't do that, that's when people are like, why is he not correcting himself? Is something else going on?
It's, I don't think the average person realizes when you speak about things as often and as long, the amount of opportunities to blow it really gets exponential. And
like tight walking.
Well, a long time ago, I'm a human being and I know that I'm going to make mistakes, and some of them are going to be stupid mistakes. You just have to own them. That's the thing, because if you own them, then you actually did learn something, like I just did with a quote that I've said many, many times. having remembered, I thought that was pulled from InnerVerse. Well, that's out the window now. That will not be an arrow in my quiver moving forward.
Or you may actually find it and say, no, Dylan, just so you know, he actually did write that. Here's the problem.
If I do, I will.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so I've got to, say I got it wrong. It's not a big deal. It's like, I think what's happening is right now, everybody is I shouldn't say that, but the people where there's controversy, they're basing their identities on this stuff. So that's why there's so much like discord.
So Dylan, I want to skip us down. I mean, the notes are great and people should definitely sub to your Substack if they're only on my Patreon so they can get the cutting room floor tidbits, of course. But I want to just skip us down to the Miriam verse to get us closer to our 3+ divider.
Where is
I'm going
that?
I'm going to read. It starts, Taylor gave an example of how you might describe astronomical phenomena, while at the same time encoding their meaning. Quote, as you would say, see there in the east how yonder group of stars is rising, as it were, out of the sea, that looks so red with the reflection of the sun's rays that you may call it the Red Sea. And that you may know the group again, mark yon bright star that seems to lead them and call him Moses. There is one not quite so bright, who shall be his brother, Aaron. And there's a sister for them, that beautiful pale-looking star that seems to rise out of the froth of the sea, which makes her look so white. That is Miriam. She has got the leprosy, and is the Venus Anadyomene of the pagan, and the Virgin Mary of the Christian fable. So, Dylan, you want to take it and explain why Miriam, the sister in the Mosaic story, is described as leprous?
Yeah, and all this is review that I've learned from Taylor and people like him. He basically, leprous is a descriptor signifying white like snow, like the star Venus. And the allegory, I wrote in July's End with Black Swans, the allegory is claimed to be before the star Venus, which would be Mary or Miriam, rising in her sign of Taurus, which happens in March, April, and May, depending on the year. The sun goes from Aries to Taurus as well, which is symbolic of Miriam becoming leprous white as snow due to the sun blotting out the constellation it enters. It'll still be possible to see Venus at dawn because she is so bright.
How did you draw the line for leprosy here?
Well, in the verse, in Numbers chapter 12, verse 10, Dylan's got this in the notes. The exact language is Miriam leprous as snow, which right there should just help you understand that this, the language of these old scriptures, they didn't have adjectives in the same way. We've covered this in previous episodes, how, for example, to describe somebody as being like something, they would use language such as it was the son of that thing or the daughter of that thing, because they didn't have the same structure of language. So this Numbers chapter 12, verse 10, Miriam leprous as snow, that's their way of using figurative language to say she's white. And it's not meant that she was literally struck with leprosy. And so then we go on from there to understand in the astrological metaphor what would be white.
Yeah, I see in the notes, and I saw one for one how he got there. It's just a very odd, it just seems a very odd way to make that implication.
So
anyhow, no here, no there. Let's keep going.
Yeah, I think that again, that's stuff that's probably in like people from Taylor exposed that. And that's what maybe some of the stuff he was saying is coming from that Freemasonic text. But the reality is when this system was written, and that's why I phrased it, the allegory is claimed to be, because that's what people in the priesthood have said and people in the mystery schools have said. I'm not making the claim. So that's why I write it the way I do.
But yeah, it's an example of this type of figurative language potentially. It makes sense of why that description is given in the first place, and then just glossed over as if it was never said that she had leprosy.
I mean, if I were translating it, I could even make the argument that it's not meant to even be white because the word white isn't there. It's just piecey, because snow is like piecey. You know what I mean? Like it comes together and falls apart, so it could be a totally different thing. But this is some of the stuff and this is why I stay away from modern occultism, because it's all coming from their mystery schools, which have zero connection. Like the Freemasons have they pretend to be descended from the builders of Egypt, but there's zero connection to them, because that was demonstrated by Egyptologists in the 1800s. When they went down there, there's so much that modern Freemasons and nobody could account for how they did anything or what anything meant. So it kind of showed like, oh yeah, you guys are putting on a front. It's cool that you took that symbolism, but you're not descended from them. You're not descended from the ancients. And so that's one of the things that you see is how much of this stuff is in the historical record versus how much of it is coming out of mystery schools. And so I try to focus on what's coming out of the mystery schools, which is why, what's coming out of the historical record, which is why I've moved away from anything modern because of this.
No, it's just interesting. If you ask any modern person, and you said, what do you think of when I say as snow? Every one of them is going to say white as snow, right? Very few people would say cold, or even very few would say what you just said, sticks together, falls apart. Anyhow, I was just making an observation. I didn't mean to slow it down. Go ahead.
No, we're all good. I think this is a great time to make our transition over to the second part of the conversation, where we're going to go into the details of who's who of the Zodiac in terms of the 12 patriarchs of the tribes of Israel. That's going to be a really fun breakdown.
The exciting part.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And for everybody who's watching, whether you're Chance's audience, whether you're my audience, or whether you're Crrow's audience, the links to the full podcast will be in the description.